Richard and Mary Parker are fictional characters of Marvel Comics as the parents of Peter Parker, the superhero known as Spider-Man. Publication history. Richard and Mary Parker were created by Stan Lee and Larry Lieber. For many years prior to The Amazing Spider-Man Annual No. 5, published in 1968, there had been no explanation of why Peter Parker was being raised by his aunt and uncle, with his parents only appearing in flashbacks and photographs. That issue finally answered the question. Richard and Mary Parker were murdered by the Red Skull in The Amazing Spider-Man No. 365, August 1992, Spider-Man's 30th anniversary. They reappeared 2 years later, however, in No. 388, April 1994. They were revealed to be life model decoys created by the Chameleon and were destroyed in the novel Mary Jane. It is said they died in a plane accident while going to Switzerland to turn in some important discovery that Richard made. Peter tries to figure out what the discovery was but fails, as he cannot figure out the things Richard has written on his board. In July 1997, Untold Tales of Spider-Man No. -1, part of Marvel Comics' Flashback Month event, written by Roger Stern and drawn by John Romita Sr. The characters' origins are expanded. Since then, they have rarely been mentioned. Fictional character biographies. Captain Richard Parker, a decorated soldier of the United States Army Special Forces, was recruited by Nick Fury to the CIA. Mary Fitzpatrick was the daughter of O.S.S. Agent Wild Will Fitzpatrick. She attended the best schools and eventually followed in her father's footsteps, becoming a CIA translator and data analyst. Richard and Mary met on the job, fell in love, and married. Originally they eloped, later having a more elaborate service, fooling many. Mary became a field agent like Richard, giving them both an easy cover as a married couple. They were assigned to investigate Baroness Adelicia von Krupp, who had captured an agent of a friendly power, who turned out to be Logan, aka Wolverine, then a Canadian operative called Agent 10. They rescued Logan from the Baroness and Baron Wolfgang von Strucker. After that mission, they discovered Mary was pregnant. Logan was actually the first person to congratulate the Parkers, commenting later that he never saw an agent as tough as Richard Parker go that white that fast. Their son, Peter Benjamin, was often left in the care of Richard's older brother, Ben, and his wife, May, when Richard and Mary were away on missions. While on a mission to investigate Albert Malak, the third Red Skull, they posed as traitors and double agents to infiltrate his criminal organization in Algeria. Ultimately being discovered, Malak had an assassin, the Finisher, kill the two by sabotaging their airplane and causing it to crash. They were subsequently declared missing in action, presumed dead, as two burnt bodies were found in the remains. After death, Richard and Mary's son, Peter, grew up to become Spider-Man. Although he has only vague memories of his parents and no memory of their militaristic history, his aunt and uncle share photographs and happy memories with him, but not their belief that they had been traitors to their country. When Peter discovers this, he travels to Algeria. He finds Malak, who sends the Finisher to kill Spider-Man. Spider-Man turns the Finisher's missile against him, killing him, but not before revealing that Richard and Mary were in fact innocent. Spider-Man returns to America with evidence and clears his parents' names. Life model decoys. Years later, the Chameleon, working for Harry Osborn, created life model decoys of Richard and Mary. These LMDs were near-perfect robotic replicas of Peter's dead parents. and managed to convince him that they had in fact been held captive overseas for most of his life. Aunt May retained some suspicions, as there were some things they did not know, such as Richard and Mary's elopement. When Peter discovers that they were fake, he suffers a nervous breakdown. However, when the decoys were ordered to attack Parker, the Mary duplicate, sharing the original's love for her son, saves him instead. Neither LMD survives the incident. After battling the chameleon, Spider-Man discovers that Harry Osborn was behind the whole thing, as an effort to avenge his, supposedly, dead father, Norman Osborn. Spider-Man then becomes mentally unhinged over time, until having a near-death experience. May Parker eventually learns the truth about the life model decoys. Via learning the truth about Spider-Man, May draws strength by talking to the graves of Mary, Richard, and Ben about Peter's life. The cynical mindset of Harry Osborn and the chameleon was present in the LMDs, particularly during Maximum Carnage, when Aunt May advises Peter to listen to your heart. The pseudo-Richard tells a very different lesson. Strip away the veneer of society and civilization and you'll find a devil inside all men. That prison was overrun with devils. Peter. Sadistic evil men who'd do anything, no matter how twisted, how immoral, to break a man down, destroy his soul. Oh, sure there are good men in the world. Your Uncle Ben was one of them. And look where it got him. Dead. Shot down like a dog. And knowing my brother, he was probably looking up at the scum who did it, trying to understand why. But when it comes to the devils, Peter, there is no why, no rhyme or reason. Use whatever means possible to stop the madness, before it swallows you up. When Shriek uses her psychic powers to turn the whole town against Spider-Man and the other superheroes, Richard remarks that the moral, orderly world he remembered while in prison was just an illusion. The evil was here, all along, festering beneath the surface. Quote, inviting a sharp rebuke from Peter's wife, Mary Jane. When exposed as frauds, some of his parents' cynicism rubs off on the son, with Spider-Man becoming unusually brutal against his enemies and developing a spider alternate personality. Ambiguities in Marvel documentation. The nature and timing of Richard and Mary Parker's fate are somewhat ambiguous in Spider-Man documentation. For one thing, the very fact that Harry Osborn and the chameleon were able to fool the State Department, Peter, and, for a time, Aunt May into thinking Richard and Mary had returned after 20 years implies that the government was never able to solidly confirm the bodies found in the original plane crash were theirs. This uncertainty was exploited by Harry Osborn and the chameleon when explaining how he and Mary survived. The false Richard Parker asserts that the bodies found were of Russian spies who stayed on the plane while they were forced to jump out. According to Spider-Man Unmasked, young Peter was orphaned at an early age when his parents were declared missing in action. Quote, it is also ambiguous how old Peter was when his parents were lost. Some accounts have it happening in his infancy. Others say he was as old as 6 years. Particularly, the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, Spider-Man, 2004. The latter view is supported by Spider-Man's musing, during The Child Within, that he remembers his parents. Yet, they were practically strangers to me. As he prepares to fight the Green Goblin and Vermin. During the fight, Harry drugs Peter and subsequently discovers that Peter blames himself for his parents' death. Harry conceives the LMD scam to avenge his own father shortly after. Another, more comprehensive book on the Marvel Universe, also released in 2004, asserts that Peter's only clear memory of his real parents was of the moment they were boarding the fateful plane, and he promised them he would be a good boy for Aunt May and Uncle Ben. Most Spider-Man stories in the main continuity are vague about Peter's exact age when he was effectively orphaned. Other versions. 1602. In Marvel 1602, Peter Parker's parents are briefly mentioned as having worked with Sir Nicholas Fury, Queen Elizabeth's chief of security. Bullet points. In the alternate timeline of Bullet Points, Ben is killed a few months into his relationship with May Parker. Richard and Mary promised to always be there for her, a vow which was later broken. House of M. In the alternate reality created by the Scarlet Witch during the House of M storyline, Peter and Gwen Stacy name their son Richard. Marvel Mongiverse. Richard has not appeared or been mentioned in the Marvel Mongiverse continuity, although Mary has. In this version, Mary is Aunt May's sister and is both the leader of the Spider Clan and a spider demon, who is known as the Spider Queen. She's been plotting to make her son, Peter, the new leader of the clan, which he later rejects. Disappointed by his rejection, Mary passes leadership of the Spider Clan to her pupil, Venom, causing Peter to give up his Spider-Man identity. MC2. In the alternate reality of MC2, Peter names his son Benjamin Richard Parker, with his second name being in honor of his father. Trouble. The 2003 Epic Comics limited series, Trouble, was marketed as the true origin of Spider-Man. In the story, characters named Richard and Mary met while on summer vacation, and Mary's friend, May, rather than Mary herself, was Peter's mother, with none of the characters' last names ever revealed. Ultimate Marvel. In the Ultimate Marvel continuity, Richard Ray Parker was a biologist instead of a spy. He and Mary supposedly died in an airplane accident when Peter was 6. And Peter still has vague memories of his parents. Before the crash, Richard was working on a cure for cancer, in the form of a biological suit that could repair its host body. He recorded a series of tapes addressed to Peter, in which he revealed his fears the suit would be used as a weapon instead of a cure. A tape recorded just before the crash revealed his project had been taken away from him. His project became the basis of Venom. His name and work were known by scientists, including Drive, Kurt Connors and the Ultimates Wasp and Giant Man. In Ultimate Spider-Man number 100, Richard Parker seemingly reappeared. He recounted that Bolivar Trask, the man responsible for shutting down the cancer cure project, brought the research staff back together. Richard had second thoughts about working on the project, now knowing the suit he developed would be used as a weapon, and chose not to get on the plane. Mary, however, felt Richard was a fool for turning down this opportunity, and appeared willing to leave her husband. This contradicts her earlier sentiments that Richard was getting in way over his head. After the crash, Richard was approached by government agent Henry Jurek for the purposes of launching his own research project in case S.H.I.E.L.D. director Nick Fury were ever to go rogue. Jurek showed Richard a surveillance video proving his son, Peter, was Spider-Man. Afterwards, he revealed himself to May Parker. May, shocked by the possibility that Richard was alive all this time, told him to go away. Later, in issue number 103, Dr. Otto Octavius, who created multiple clones of Spider-Man, reveals that Richard Parker was a clone. Later confirmed when Susan Storm of the Fantastic Four runs a test on Richard's DNA and finds it identical to Peter's. Apparently, the cloning process severely aged Richard, though his memories were false. Richard loves Peter like a son and asks the Fantastic Four to look after him before passing away. in the final FMV of the Ultimate Spider-Man video game. It is implied Eddie Brock Sr. and the Venom suit are responsible for the plane crash that killed Peter's parents. In issue number 4 of Ultimate Origins, which takes place 15 years before the current Ultimate timeline, Richard is shown to have been hired by the U.S. government and Nick Fury as part of a project to recreate the super soldier serum at a covert lab in Dover, New Jersey. Richard worked alongside fellow scientists, a young Hank Pym, Franklin Storm, father of Sue and Johnny Storm, and Bruce Banner. One day, while Pym and Banner are testing a possible match to the serum, Richard is just outside the lab being visited by his wife and recently born son, Peter. Having just tested the serum on himself, Banner transforms into the Hulk and goes on a rampage, destroying the complex. Richard and Mary are caught in an explosion and severely injured. Artist Mark Bagley based the likeness of the Ultimate version of Richard Parker on that of Peter Parker as drawn by John Romita Sr. and Gil Kane in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Feeling he hadn't captured Peter's appearance during his earlier run on The Amazing Spider-Man in the 1990s. In other media, television, Richard and Mary Parker appeared in Spider-Man, the animated series. In the episode Doctor Strange, they appear as an illusion created by Baron Mordo when he was using his powers on Peter Parker. In the 5th season, 6 Forgotten Warriors saga, it is revealed they were spies investigating a machine called the Doomsday Device created by the Red Skull in Russia. After learning from Nick Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D. that his parents were traitors, Peter traveled to Russia and cleared their names. In The Spectacular Spider-Man, both Peter and Eddie Brock's fathers are mentioned as having been scientists who worked together, with both sets of parents having died in a plane crash. Richard Parker is briefly mentioned in the Ultimate Spider-Man episode, Great Power film. Richard and Mary Parker appear in The Amazing Spider-Man with Richard played by Campbell Scott and Mary played by Beth Davids. Like in the comics, they are both killed in a plane crash. At the film's beginning, they say goodbye to a 4-year-old Peter as they drop him off at Uncle Ben and Aunt May's. When Peter asks why they were leaving, Richard answers that it was something they had to do. Campbell Scott and Beth Davids reprise their roles of Richard and Mary Parker in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, with their characters dying in a plane crash at the beginning of the film. Later, May reveals that she and Ben were visited by government agents a few days after Richard and Mary disappeared and were told that Richard was planning to sell secret weapons to foreign powers. However, while going through his father's things, Peter discovers clues that lead him to a secret lab his father had established in a disused railway station, which includes a video Richard recorded before his death revealing he fled Oscorp to prevent his discoveries from being used for biological weapons. He also reveals Oscorp's genetically engineered spiders were created using his DNA, thus explaining why Peter is the only successful cross-species to be created. The spiders were specifically encoded to the Parker bloodline and will not fully bond with anyone else. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, extra features exists a scene showing Richard alive, who shows up next to Peter at Gwen Stacy's grave, as it is an extra scene and not shown in the final cut of the movie. Richard Parker is still considered deceased along with Mary Parker. Video games. Richard and Mary Parker were featured in the Ultimate Spider-Man video game with Richard Parker voiced by Lauren Lester and Mary Parker having no dialogue. It reveals in a flashback that Richard Parker was killed when Eddie Brock Sr. put on the Venom suit mid-flight. Mary Parker was one of the 3 survivors of the plane crash, but died in the ambulance before she could mention what happened. Novels. In the Sinister Six novel trilogy by Adam Troy Castro, Gathering of the Sinister Six, Revenge of the Sinister Six, and Secret of the Sinister Six, a man known as the Gentleman, an internationally known criminal mastermind, currently in his late 90s and possessing a strong disdain for the rest of humanity, as well as being the brother of the Red Skull's assassin the Finisher, was revealed to have been partially responsible for Richard and Mary's deaths, having revealed their true identities to the Red Skull, only asking that Peter be spared so that he would be more of a challenge later on in life. The possibility was also raised that Spider-Man had an older sister, the Gentleman's ward, a young woman called Pitty, who was capable of climbing walls, possessed a strength level approximately equal to Spider-Man, and could create a darkness, preventing anyone around her from seeing. At the conclusion of the trilogy, Peter Parker meets Logan, who reveals he worked regularly with the Parkers on joint missions between the American and Canadian Secret Services. The discovery that Logan was the first person to congratulate Richard after learning that Mary was pregnant prompted Peter to say, "Wolverine's practically my uncle." Quote, Richard Parker at Marvel Wiki. Richard Parker at Comic Vine. Mary Parker at Marvel Wiki. Mary Parker at Comic Vine.